Welcome, traveler, to the city where east meets west, where golden domes pierce the heavens and triple walls have held back empires for 1,000 years. You stand now in Constantinople, the beating heart of a civilization that refused to die when Rome fell, that preserved the wisdom of the ancients while forging something entirely new. But here is the question that haunts historians to this day. How did a single city, perched on a narrow peninsula between two seas, become the most coveted prize on earth for over 11 centuries? What made emperors from Persia to Arabia to the steppes of Central Asia throw their armies against these walls, only to watch their ambitions shatter like waves against stone? And why, when the western half of Rome crumbled into darkness, did this eastern jewel not only survive, but flourish, becoming the wealthiest, most sophisticated civilization the medieval world had ever known? The answer lies in a story so vast, so filled with triumph and tragedy, with brilliant rulers and catastrophic betrayals, that it spans more than a millennium of human history. This is the complete journey through Byzantium, from the moment Constantine the Great stood upon these 7 hills in the year 330 and declared a new capital for Rome, to the final heartbreaking morning in 1453 when the last emperor fell defending these very walls. You will witness everything. The rise of Justinian and his empress Theodora, who together nearly restored the entire Mediterranean world to Roman rule. The terrifying nights when Greek fire turned the sea itself into an inferno, saving the city from Arab conquest. The bitter theological storms of Iconoclasm that tore families apart and toppled emperors. The golden age under the Macedonian dynasty, when Constantinople became the largest, richest city on earth, its markets overflowing with silks from China and spices from India. You will walk through the hippodrome, where chariot races decided the fate of dynasties. You will stand beneath the impossible dome of Hagia Sophia, watching light stream through 40 windows as if heaven itself were descending. You will witness the unforgivable betrayal of 1204, when Christian crusaders turned upon their fellow Christians and burned the greatest library since Alexandria. And you will be there at the end when Constantine XI, the last Roman emperor, removed his purple robes and charged into the Ottoman ranks, choosing death over surrender. This is not merely history. This is the story of how classical civilization survived, how Orthodox Christianity spread across Eastern Europe, how the knowledge of ancient Greece reached the Renaissance. Everything you know about the modern world was shaped by what happened here. If you find yourself drawn to these complete journeys through lost civilizations, please subscribe so you never miss our next exploration. Each week, we bring you the full story of a vanished world, from its first breath to its final echo. Now, let us begin our journey in the year 306, when a young soldier named Constantine first dreamed of empire. The year is 306 of the Common Era. In the fortress city of Eboracum, at the edge of the known world where Roman roads meet the mists of Britannia, a dying emperor draws his final breath. Constantius Chlorus, ruler of the western provinces, passes into history. His legions do not hesitate. They raise their shields, they beat their swords against bronze, and they proclaim his son Augustus on the spot. Constantine is 34 years old. He has spent his youth as a hostage in the Eastern court, watching emperors rise and fall like waves against stone. He has learned patience. He has learned to read the currents of power. Now, those currents carry him toward a destiny that will reshape the world. The Roman Empire of this age is a fractured thing. 4 emperors share power under the system called the Tetrarchy. each ruling a quarter of the Mediterranean world. Constantine's claim threatens this delicate balance. Civil war becomes inevitable. 6 years pass, armies march, alliances shift like desert sand. By 312, Constantine stands at the Milvian Bridge outside Rome itself, facing the forces of his rival Maxentius. The Tiber flows dark beneath ancient stone. Tens of thousands of soldiers wait for dawn. What happens next will be debated for 17 centuries. Constantine later claims a vision, a cross of light blazing across the afternoon sky, bearing words in Greek. By this sign, conquer. His soldiers paint the Chi symbol on their shields, the first 2 letters of Christ's name in Greek. They advance. Maxentius drowns in the Tiber. His army scatters. Constantine enters Rome as sole master of the West. The following year brings the Edict of Milan. Christianity, persecuted for generations, gains legal protection throughout the empire. Churches emerge from shadows. Bishops walk openly through forum and marketplace. The faith of fishermen and slaves begins its transformation into the religion of emperors. But Constantine's vision extends beyond theology. He sees that Rome itself has become a liability. The eternal city sits too far from the frontiers that matter, too encrusted with pagan tradition, too haunted by senatorial ambition. The empire needs a new heart. His eyes turn eastward. The ancient Greek colony of Byzantium occupies a promontory of extraordinary strategic value. 7 hills rise above waters where 2 continents nearly touch. The Bosphorus Strait connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. Whoever holds this ground controls the flow of grain from Egypt, gold from the Caucasus, silk from distant China. In 324, Constantine defeats his last rival and becomes sole emperor. He immediately begins transforming Byzantium into something unprecedented, a Christian Rome, a Nova Roma, built from foundation stones to golden dome as a monument to the new faith and the new order. Workers arrive by the thousands. Architects draft plans for forums, palaces, churches, and a hippodrome rivaling any in the ancient world. Constantine personally walks the perimeter of his new walls, marking boundaries that will define the city for centuries. When advisors question the vast scale, he replies that he follows an invisible guide. The construction consumes 11 years. Columns are stripped from temples across the Mediterranean. Statues of pagan gods are repurposed as civic decoration, their divine power neutralized by Christian context. A great church rises where the Hagia Sophia will one day stand, though not yet in its final, magnificent form. On the 11th of May, 330, Constantine dedicates his city. Ceremonies blend Roman tradition with Christian liturgy. The emperor processes through streets still dusty with construction, past buildings still rising toward completion. He names his creation Constantinople, the city of Constantine. He has perhaps 7 years left to live. He will spend them consolidating power, managing church councils, and watching his creation grow. When death finally comes in 337, he receives baptism on his deathbed, the first Roman emperor to die a Christian. Behind him, Constantinople gleams above the Bosphorus. The city is young, incomplete, its destiny unwritten, but the foundation has been laid for something that will outlast every other Roman institution by 1,000 years. Constantine's sons inherit an empire transformed but not yet settled. The decades following 337 witness a dynasty consuming itself, brothers warring against brothers, cousins eliminating cousins. Yet through this bloodshed, one question burns hotter than any succession dispute. What does it mean for Rome to be Christian? The answer emerges slowly, violently, through councils and creeds and imperial edicts. Constantius II, surviving longest among Constantine's heirs, favors Arianism, the belief that Christ was created rather than eternal. Bishops find themselves exiled, recalled, exiled again, as theological winds shift with each imperial mood. Churches that once sheltered, persecuted faithful now become battlegrounds for competing visions of divine truth. In Constantinople, the great church foundations laid by Constantine rise higher. Craftsmen shape marble columns, set mosaic tesserae into wet plaster, create spaces where light itself becomes theology. The imperial palace complex expands along the Bosphorus shore, its purple chambers witnessing ceremonies that blend Roman tradition with Christian symbolism. Emperors no longer merely rule, they reign as God's chosen instruments on earth. Julian, called the Apostate, attempts to reverse everything, from 361 to 363. This philosopher-emperor reopens pagan temples, strips Christian clergy of privileges, dreams of restoring the old gods. His death on a Persian battlefield ends the experiment. No emperor will ever again attempt to undo Christianity's triumph. Then comes Theodosius. Rising from Spanish military nobility, he assumes the Eastern throne in 379 amid catastrophe. Gothic tribes have shattered Roman armies at Adrianople, killing Emperor Valens himself. The Balkans burn, refugees flood Constantinople's streets. Theodosius proves himself both general and theologian. He settles the Goths as federates within imperial territory, a pragmatic solution that plants seeds of future transformation. More significantly, he settles the religious question with finality. In 380, the Edict of Thessalonica declares Nicene Christianity the sole legitimate faith of the Roman state. All subjects must believe what the bishops of Rome and Alexandria believe. Arianism becomes heresy. Paganism becomes crime. The temples that survived Julian's brief revival now face systematic closure. The great sanctuaries of antiquity fall silent. At Olympia, priests perform final rites before abandoning altars that had received offerings for 1,000 years. At Delphi, the oracle speaks no more. At Eleusis, the mysteries that had promised initiates glimpses of eternity cease forever. An entire spiritual world passes into memory. In its place rises a new sacred geography. Churches multiply across the empire, their architecture proclaiming theological truths. The basilica form, borrowed from Roman law courts, creates vast interior spaces where congregations gather beneath images of Christ enthroned in heaven. Baptistries welcome converts into the faith that now defines Roman identity itself. Theodosius demonstrates that Christian emperors answer to Christian morality. When his soldiers massacre thousands at Thessalonica in 390, Bishop Ambrose of Milan bars him from communion until he performs public penance. The emperor submits, walking barefoot into church, acknowledging that even supreme power bows before divine law. This moment reshapes the relationship between throne and altar for centuries to come. Byzantine emperors will claim authority over church affairs, but they will also accept that their souls require priestly care. The tension between imperial power and ecclesiastical authority becomes a defining feature of the civilization taking shape. Theodosius dies in 395, having briefly reunited the entire empire under his rule. His final act divides it again between his sons. Arcadius receives the east, Honorius the west. This division proves permanent. The western half will crumble within 80 years. The eastern half, centered on Constantinople, will endure for more than a millennium. The city Constantine founded now anchors an explicitly Christian empire. Its churches gleam with gold. Its ceremonies proclaim divine favor. Its walls, soon to be strengthened beyond anything the ancient world has known, will guard not merely a capital, but an entire civilization's claim to sacred destiny. The division of 395 creates two empires from one. Within decades, the difference between their fates becomes starkly visible. The western provinces hemorrhage territory to Germanic kingdoms. Rome itself faces siege. But Constantinople, the city Constantine built upon 7 hills overlooking the Bosphorus, not only survives but transforms itself into an impregnable fortress. The young emperor Arcadius proves weak, dominated by ministers and his formidable wife, Eudoxia. Yet the Eastern administration functions despite imperial inadequacy. Tax revenues flow. Armies maintain discipline. The bureaucracy Constantine established continues its methodical work. When Arcadius dies in 408, his son Theodosius inherits the throne at age 7. A regency governs, but the machinery of state never falters. The Western Empire enjoys no such stability. Visigoths under Alaric rampage through Italy. In 410, the unthinkable occurs. Rome falls to barbarian sack for the first time in 8 centuries. Refugees flood eastward, bringing tales of horror and collapse. Constantinople absorbs them, its population swelling, its importance magnifying with each Western catastrophe. The young Theodosius comes of age amid this transformation. His reign, spanning 4 decades, witnesses the Eastern Empire's definitive separation from Western decline. The most visible symbol of this divergence rises in stone and mortar along Constantinople's western approach. The original walls Constantine built no longer suffice. The city has grown far beyond them. More critically, the threats have intensified. Huns press against the Danube frontier. Germanic tribes probe imperial defenses. The Eastern Empire requires fortifications unprecedented in scale and sophistication. Construction begins around 413 under the prefect Anthemius, who governs during Theodosius's minority. The new walls extend nearly 6 kilometers from the Sea of Marmara to the Golden Horn, enclosing an area 5 times larger than Constantine's original city. But mere length does not define their revolutionary character. The Theodosian walls comprise a defensive system of terrifying complexity. An outer moat, 20 meters wide and 10 meters deep, presents the first obstacle. Behind it rises a low outer wall studded with towers. Then comes a broad terrace, the Peribolos, where defenders can mass. Finally, the great inner wall soars 12 meters high, its towers reaching 20 meters, spaced at intervals, allowing overlapping fields of fire. No siege technology of the age can overcome such defenses. Attackers must cross the moat under arrow fire, scale the outer wall while defenders retreat to prepared positions, cross the killing ground of the Peribolos, then somehow breach the massive inner fortifications. The mathematics of assault become impossible. The walls reach completion around 413, then face immediate testing. An earthquake damages sections in 447, just as Attila's Hunnic Empire reaches its terrifying apex. The prefect Constantine organizes frantic repairs. Circus factions, normally rivals, unite in Reconstruction. Within 60 days, the walls stand stronger than before, a second outer wall added to the original design. Attila demands tribute, threatens assault, but never attempts the siege. His armies devastate the Balkans, extract enormous payments, yet Constantinople remains inviolate behind its triple fortifications. When Attila dies in 453, his empire fragments. The Eastern Empire endures. These decades establish patterns lasting centuries. The West collapses entirely by 476. The East persists, its survival guaranteed by walls no enemy can breach, by administration no crisis can shatter, by wealth no tribute can exhaust. Constantinople becomes synonymous with permanence itself, the city that cannot fall, the new Rome that will outlast the old by 1,000 years. The year 527 marks the beginning of an age that will define Byzantine ambition for all centuries to come. Justinian ascends to the purple, and with him rises a vision of restoration so vast it will reshape the Mediterranean world. He inherits an empire wealthy, secure, and confident behind its impregnable walls. The treasury overflows with gold accumulated through decades of careful administration. The army stands ready, its commanders experienced, its soldiers disciplined. Constantinople itself has grown into the greatest city on earth, its population approaching 500,000 souls, its harbors crowded with ships from every corner of the known world. But Justinian dreams of more than mere survival. He dreams of reconquest, of reclaiming every province lost to barbarian kingdoms, of reuniting the Roman world under a single emperor. The Vandals hold Africa, the Ostrogoths rule Italy, Visigoths possess Spain. To Justinian, these are not permanent arrangements, but temporary occupations awaiting correction. 5 years into his reign, disaster strikes from within. The Nika riots of 532 erupt from the Hippodrome, where racing factions transform into revolutionary mobs. The city burns, flames consume entire districts. The mob proclaims a rival emperor. Justinian prepares to flee, his nerve failing before the chaos engulfing his capital. Theodora speaks. The empress, risen from the theatrical underworld to the purple chamber, refuses flight. Better to die in imperial purple than live in exile, she declares. Her words steel the emperor's resolve. General Belisarius acts with terrible efficiency. His soldiers seal the hippodrome exits and slaughter the trapped rioters. 30,000 die in a single afternoon. The rebellion ends in blood. From this destruction rises opportunity. The burned districts require rebuilding, and Justinian seizes the moment to construct monuments worthy of eternal Rome. Where the old Church of Holy Wisdom once stood, architects Anthemius and Isidore designed something unprecedented. Hagia Sophia rises over 6 years, its massive dome appearing to float upon a ring of windows, its interior surfaces covered in gold mosaic that transforms sunlight into divine radiance. Simultaneously, Belisarius sails for Africa. The Vandal kingdom, weakened by internal strife, collapses with astonishing speed. Carthage falls in 533. Within 2 years, all of North Africa returns to imperial control. The granaries of Egypt find their ancient partner restored. The Mediterranean's southern shore Roman once more. Italy proves more difficult. The Ostrogothic kingdom resists with desperate courage. Belisarius captures Rome in 536, loses it, recaptures it. The peninsula becomes a wasteland of siege and counter-siege. Gothic kings rise and fall. Cities change hands repeatedly. The war drags on for 2 decades, consuming resources, devastating populations, reducing ancient urban centers to shadows of their former glory. Yet, by 562, imperial banners fly from Ravenna to the Straits of Gibraltar. Justinian has achieved his dream. The Mediterranean is once again a Roman lake, its shores united under Constantinople's authority. The cost proves staggering in gold and blood, but the vision stands realized. Beyond military conquest, Justinian transforms law itself. The Corpus Juris Civilis codifies centuries of Roman legal tradition into coherent form. This compilation will shape European jurisprudence for a millennium, its principles echoing through medieval courts and modern constitutions alike. The emperor builds obsessively. Fortresses line every frontier. Churches rise in every province. Cisterns guarantee Constantinople's water supply against any siege. The city becomes a monument to imperial will, its skyline dominated by Hagia. Sophia's unprecedented dome, its streets paved with ambition-made stone. Theodora dies in 548, her influence already woven into imperial policy. Justinian rules alone for 17 more years. His dreams achieved, but his empire exhausted. The treasury empties, the army thins. Plague ravages populations repeatedly. When Justinian finally dies in 565, he leaves an empire vastly expanded but dangerously overstretched, its resources depleted, its frontiers vulnerable. The empire Justinian leaves behind enters an age of shadows. 565 gives way to decades where survival itself becomes the measure of success, where the great reconquests begin their slow unraveling, and where a plague unlike any before reshapes the very foundations of Mediterranean civilization. The sickness first appears in 541, arriving on grain ships from Egypt. Procopius, who witnesses its devastation firsthand, describes swellings in the groin and armpits, fevers that consume victims within days, a mortality so vast that bodies pile faster than the living can bury them. Constantinople loses perhaps 40% of its population in the first wave alone. The emperor himself falls ill, though he survives. The empire's tax base collapses. Military recruitment becomes impossible. Entire provinces empty of farmers, craftsmen, soldiers. The plague returns in cycles, striking every generation for 2 centuries. Each wave finds populations barely recovered from the last. Cities that once held hundreds of thousands shrink to tens of thousands. The great urban network that defined Roman civilization contracts, leaving ghost quarters within ancient walls, forums where grass grows between paving stones, aqueducts serving populations a fraction of their original design. Justin II inherits this wounded realm. His reign witnesses the first permanent losses of Justinian's conquests. The Lombards pour into Italy beginning in 568, seizing territory the empire had spent decades and fortunes reconquering. Within years, Byzantine Italy fragments into isolated enclaves around Ravenna, Rome, and scattered coastal cities. The dream of a restored Western Empire dies not in dramatic battle, but in slow territorial hemorrhage. The Persian frontier demands constant attention. The Sassanid Empire, ancient Rome's only peer, probes Byzantine weakness with increasing confidence. Fortresses along the Euphrates become the empire's true lifeline, their garrisons maintaining vigilance against enemies who understand that plague has hollowed out Byzantine strength. The great frontier cities of Dara and Antioch witness sieges, negotiations, tributes paid in gold to purchase temporary peace. Maurice rises to the purple in 582, a capable soldier who understands the empire's desperate arithmetic. His military reforms attempt to stretch diminished resources across impossible frontiers. He negotiates with Persia, achieving genuine peace that allows concentration against other threats. The Avars and Slavs press the Balkan frontier, their raids reaching the walls of Thessaloniki, their settlements transforming the ethnic composition of provinces that had been Greek and Latin for centuries. The emperor's fiscal discipline saves the treasury but costs him popularity. Soldiers go unpaid. Campaigns extend beyond endurance. When Maurice orders the army to winter beyond the Danube in 602, mutiny erupts. Phocas, a centurion of no particular distinction, rides this wave of military discontent to Constantinople. Maurice and his sons die by execution, the first emperor murdered by his own troops in over a century. Phocas proves catastrophically incompetent. His 8-year reign witnesses the near-total collapse of Byzantine frontiers. Persia, outraged at the murder of Maurice, who had been their ally, launches invasions that will eventually reach the Mediterranean. The Balkans fall entirely to Avar and Slavic control. Constantinople itself faces threats it has not known since Attila's time. Yet, even in this darkness, the structures Justinian built endure. The Theodosian walls remain impregnable. The administrative apparatus, though strained, continues functioning. The Orthodox Church provides continuity when political authority fragments. Provincial cities maintain their defenses, their populations reduced but resilient. The plague transforms more than demographics. Labor becomes precious, shifting economic relationships between landowners and workers. The great estates that dominated late Roman agriculture struggle to find hands for harvest. Military recruitment draws from ever smaller pools, forcing reliance on federate troops and mercenaries whose loyalty proves uncertain. Theodora's legal legacy persists through these catastrophes. The protections she championed for women, the charitable institutions she founded, the religious compromises she negotiated, continue shaping Byzantine society. Her influence outlives the crisis, embedded in law codes that subsequent emperors preserve, even as they struggle merely to survive. By 602, the empire Justinian imagined lies in ruins. Italy is lost. Africa barely holds. The Balkans have become foreign territory. Persia prepares invasions that will penetrate to Egypt itself. Yet, Constantinople endures, its walls intact, its institutions functioning, its people diminished but unbroken. The empire that emerges from this crucible will be fundamentally different from Justinian's creation. Smaller, more focused, more Greek than Latin, but still recognizably heir to Rome's legacy. The empire that barely survives into the 7th century finds its savior arriving not from the palace but from the sea. In 610, Heraclius sails from Carthage with a fleet bearing African legions, overthrowing the usurper Phocas, whose incompetence has invited Persian armies deep into Roman territory. The new emperor inherits catastrophe. Persian forces occupy Syria, Palestine, Egypt. The treasury stands empty. The army exists more on parchment than in reality. Heraclius contemplates abandoning Constantinople entirely, relocating the government to Carthage where his family holds power. Only the patriarch's intervention prevents this flight. Instead, the emperor undertakes something unprecedented in Roman history. He melts church treasures, strips bronze from monuments, debases the currency, and builds an army from nothing. For years he trains these forces while Persians advance ever closer, their armies reaching the Bosphorus itself by 626. Then Heraclius strikes. Rather than defending Constantinople directly, he launches his forces eastward through Armenia, carrying the war into Persian heartland. This campaign becomes something approaching holy war, the emperor personally leading troops while priests chant and icons accompany the standards. The strategy proves brilliant. Persian forces must withdraw from Constantinople's approaches to defend their homeland. The decisive engagement comes at Nineveh in 627. Byzantine forces shatter the Persian army on the plains where ancient Assyrian kings once ruled. Heraclius pursues the broken enemy toward their capital at Ctesiphon. The Persian king flees, is murdered by his own nobles, and the empire that challenged Rome for 7 centuries collapses into civil war. In 630, Heraclius enters Jerusalem in triumph. The true cross, captured by Persians 14 years earlier, returns to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The emperor walks barefoot through the streets, carrying the sacred relic himself. This moment represents Byzantine power at its most theatrical, most spiritually charged, most apparently triumphant. Yet, even as Heraclius celebrates, messengers bring disturbing reports from Arabia. A new faith has unified the desert tribes. Within 2 years of Jerusalem's recovery, Arab armies probe Byzantine defenses in Palestine. By 634, full invasion begins. The exhausted empire cannot respond effectively. Armies depleted by the Persian wars, treasuries emptied, populations reduced by plague and conflict, face fresh warriors inspired by religious fervor. At Yarmouk in 636, Byzantine forces suffer catastrophic defeat. Syria falls within months. Jerusalem surrenders in 638. Egypt follows by 642. Heraclius watches his life's work dissolve. The provinces he saved from Persia passed to Arab control within a decade. The emperor who recovered the true cross dies in 641, his final years shadowed by theological controversies and family intrigues. His successors inherit an empire reduced to Anatolia, Constantinople, and scattered territories. The transformation proves permanent. The Eastern Mediterranean world Heraclius knew, Greek-speaking, Christian, connected by Roman roads and Mediterranean trade, fragments into separate civilizations. Byzantium survives, but as something fundamentally altered. The universal Roman Empire becomes a Greek Christian state defending narrower borders against new enemies, whose faith and culture share nothing with classical heritage. The empire that emerges from Heraclius's reign faces an enemy unlike any before. The Arab Caliphate does not merely raid and retreat. It conquers, holds, and builds. By 670, the Umayyad dynasty controls territories stretching from Persia to North Africa, and its ambitions fix upon the greatest prize remaining, Constantinople itself. The first great siege begins in 674. An Arab fleet of unprecedented size enters the Sea of Marmara, establishing a forward base on the peninsula of Cyzicus. For 4 consecutive summers, Muslim forces assault the capital's seaward defenses, while their navy attempts to blockade the city into submission. The Theodosian walls prove impervious to direct assault, their triple fortifications mocking every attempt at breach. But the empire possesses a weapon the Arabs cannot anticipate. Greek fire emerges during these desperate years, its exact origins shrouded in deliberate secrecy. A Syrian refugee named Kallinikos brings the formula to Constantinople, though whether he invents or merely transmits this terrible knowledge remains unclear. The substance defies natural law. It burns upon water, clings to ships and flesh alike, cannot be extinguished by any conventional means. Bronze siphons mounted on Byzantine dromons spray liquid flame across the waves. Arab vessels become floating pyres, their crews choosing drowning over immolation. The psychological impact exceeds even the physical destruction. Sailors who survive carry tales of supernatural fire that pursues its victims across the sea's surface, that burns brighter when doused with water. The siege breaks in 678. Arab losses prove catastrophic, their fleet shattered by storms and Greek fire during the retreat. The Caliphate accepts a 30-year truce, paying tribute to Constantinople in an unprecedented reversal. The empire that seemed destined for extinction demonstrates its capacity for survival. 40 years of relative peace follow, but the Caliphate never abandons its ultimate objective. By 717, a new Umayyad Caliph, Suleiman, assembles the largest military force the Islamic world has yet produced. Estimates suggest 80,000 soldiers and 1,800 ships converge upon Constantinople. The empire's new emperor, Leo III, an Isaurian general who seized power amid the crisis, prepares for the defining confrontation of his age. The second siege proves even more desperate than the first. Arab armies cross into Thrace, establishing camps that encircle the land walls completely. Their fleet attempts to seal the Golden Horn, cutting the city from maritime supply. Constantinople's population swells with refugees while granaries empty week by week. Leo proves a commander of exceptional ability. His engineers deploy Greek fire with devastating precision, destroying Arab supply ships, attempting to reinforce the blockade. The weapons formula remains so closely guarded that even Byzantine sailors operating the siphons understand only their specific tasks, never the complete process. Winter arrives with unusual severity. Arab soldiers, equipped for Syrian and Egyptian climates, perish by thousands in Thracian snows. Their horses and camels die in greater numbers still, eliminating cavalry advantage. Disease spreads through camps where corpses cannot be properly buried in frozen ground. Spring of 718 brings no relief for the besiegers. Bulgarian forces, persuaded by Byzantine diplomacy and gold, attack Arab positions from the north. The Caliphate's reinforcement fleet, arriving from Egypt, falls victim to Greek fire and defection by Christian crews pressed into Muslim service. By August, the siege collapses entirely. Arab chronicles record losses approaching 150,000 men. The retreating fleet encounters storms that destroy most surviving vessels. Barely 5 ships return to Syrian ports. The caliph who launched this enterprise dies within weeks, some say of grief. Constantinople's survival reshapes Mediterranean history. The Arab advance into Europe, which might have receded through the Balkans into Central Europe, halts permanently at the Bosphorus. The Caliphate turns its expansive energies elsewhere, towards Central Asia and the Iberian Peninsula. The Byzantine Empire, reduced and battered, nonetheless endures as Christendom's eastern shield. Greek fire remains the empire's most closely guarded secret for centuries. Emperors swear successors to silence regarding its composition. The formula eventually disappears entirely, lost when the empire itself falls, leaving modern chemists to speculate about petroleum, quickite, and substances unknown. The empire that survives the Arab sieges enters a century of internal warfare more devastating than any foreign invasion. The battleground shifts from city walls to church interiors, from military frontiers to the human soul itself. Beginning in 726, Byzantine civilization tears itself apart over a question that seems, to modern eyes, almost incomprehensibly abstract: whether sacred images possess spiritual power or constitute forbidden idolatry. Emperor Leo III, the Isaurian who defended Constantinople against the Arab onslaught, turns his reforming energy inward. His military success grants him authority to challenge traditions centuries old. In 726, he orders the removal of the great icon of Christ from the chalky gate, the ceremonial entrance to the imperial palace. Soldiers ascending ladders to reach the sacred image face a mob of devout women. Blood spills on Constantinople streets for the first time over painted wood and pigment. Leo's motivations remain debated across centuries. Some see genuine theological conviction, influenced perhaps by Islamic prohibitions against religious imagery or by Old Testament commandments against graven images. Others detect political calculation, an emperor seeking to break the power of monasteries grown wealthy from pilgrimage and icon veneration. The truth likely encompasses both impulses, religious sincerity and imperial ambition intertwined. The iconoclast position possesses intellectual coherence. Its defenders argue that depicting Christ's human form either separates his humanity from his divinity, or attempts the impossible task of circumscribing the infinite within finite representation. Icons, they claim, have become idols, worship for themselves rather than directing prayer toward heaven. The empire's recent disasters, they suggest, represent divine punishment for this spiritual corruption. Resistance crystallizes around monasteries and their theological champions. John of Damascus, writing safely beyond imperial reach in Muslim-controlled Syria, produces devastating rebuttals. The incarnation itself, he argues, sanctifies matter. God became flesh, became visible, became depictable. To deny the legitimacy of Christ's image is to deny the reality of his human nature. Icons serve as windows to heaven, not replacements for it. The conflict divides families, cities, and the church itself. Monks suffer imprisonment, mutilation, and execution. Monasteries face closure, their properties confiscated, their communities scattered. Precious icons disappear into hiding, buried beneath floors, concealed behind walls, smuggled to distant provinces where imperial authority reaches weakly. Some believers choose exile over compliance, fleeing to Italy where the papacy condemns iconoclasm as heresy. Leo's son, Constantine V, intensifies persecution with systematic ferocity. His reign from 741 to 775 represents iconoclasm's most violent phase. The emperor personally supervises the destruction of religious art, whitewashing church walls, replacing sacred figures with crosses and decorative patterns. Monks become particular targets, publicly humiliated, forced to marry, paraded through the hippodrome, holding hands with women while crowds jeer. Yet iconoclasm never achieves universal acceptance. Popular devotion to images proves impossible to eradicate entirely. Women especially maintain veneration practices within households, preserving small icons as family treasures. The Empress Irene, regent for her young son Constantine VI, finally reverses imperial policy. The Second Council of Nicaea in 787 restores icon veneration, carefully distinguishing between worship owed to God alone and veneration properly offered to sacred images. The theological resolution proves temporary. Iconoclasm will return in the 9th century for another generation of conflict, but the first iconoclast period establishes patterns that shape Byzantine spirituality permanently. Icons emerge from persecution with enhanced sacred status, their survival itself miraculous testimony to divine protection. The theology of images, refined through controversy, becomes central to Orthodox identity. The peace proves fragile. Within 3 decades of Nicaea's restoration, iconoclasm returns with renewed imperial fury. 814 brings Leo V to the throne, a military emperor convinced that icon veneration has brought divine disfavor upon Byzantine arms. The Bulgarian Khan Krum threatens Constantinople itself, and Leo interprets military setbacks as heavenly punishment for abandoning the iconoclast position. The second iconoclasm differs from the first in crucial ways. The theological arguments have already been made, the positions hardened through decades of controversy. This renewal feels less like genuine religious reform and more like imperial stubbornness, emperors clinging to a discredited position while the broader church and population resist. The Patriarchate of Constantinople becomes a battleground, with iconoclast emperors deposing icon-venerating patriarchs and installing compliant replacements. Monasteries bear the heaviest burden. These communities have become the primary defenders of sacred images, their scriptoria producing theological treatises, their churches preserving icons through careful concealment. Imperial authorities target monastic properties with particular intensity, confiscating lands, dispersing communities, forcing monks to choose between imperial obedience and religious conviction. Many choose exile, carrying precious icons to remote provinces beyond effective imperial control. The resistance takes forms both dramatic and subtle. Theodora of Stoudios emerges as the leading voice against iconoclasm, his monastery becoming a center of opposition that imperial pressure cannot silence. His letters circulate throughout the empire, encouraging resistance, providing theological arguments, maintaining networks of communication among scattered icon defenders. Imprisonment and exile only enhance his authority among the faithful. Within palace walls, women preserve what emperors seek to destroy. Empresses and court ladies maintain private devotion to icons, passing sacred images between trusted households, protecting family treasures that represent generations of piety. This domestic resistance proves impossible to eradicate, the private sphere remaining beyond effective imperial surveillance. 842 brings the death of Emperor Theophilos, the last iconoclast ruler. His widow Theodora assumes regency for their young son, Michael III, and she moves swiftly to end the controversy that has divided the empire for over a century. The empress herself has secretly venerated icons throughout her husband's reign, maintaining hidden images within the imperial apartments despite the danger such devotion posed. The restoration unfolds with careful political calculation. Theodora convenes a council that reinstates icon veneration, deposes the iconoclast patriarch, and establishes the theological settlement that will endure permanently. The first Sunday of Lent in 843 witnesses a great procession through Constantinople, icons carried triumphantly through streets that had seen their destruction. This day becomes the Feast of Orthodoxy, celebrated annually as the victory of true faith over heresy. The procession moves from the Blachernay Church to Hagia Sophia, clergy and laity carrying icons that have survived decades of persecution. Each image represents a small miracle of preservation, hidden in walls, buried in gardens, smuggled between monasteries, protected by faithful hands through years of danger. The great church receives these returning treasures with ceremonies of thanksgiving. The golden mosaics of the dome, witnessing the restoration of images throughout the sacred space below. Theodora's triumph establishes patterns that define Byzantine orthodoxy permanently. Icons become not merely permitted, but essential, their veneration a mark of correct belief that distinguishes true Christians from heretics. The theology refined through controversy achieves final form, the distinction between worship and veneration, providing intellectual foundation for practices that touch every aspect of Byzantine spiritual life. The monasteries emerge from persecution with enhanced prestige and independence. Their resistance has proven them faithful when emperors wavered, their preservation of icons demonstrating divine protection of sacred communities. Imperial attempts to control monastic wealth and influence face new obstacles. The memory of iconoclast persecution providing moral authority that secular power cannot easily overcome. The Feast of Orthodoxy becomes the empire's annual celebration of its own identity, the moment when Byzantium declares itself guardian of true Christian faith against all deviation. The icons themselves, survivors of destruction, become more precious for their suffering, each image carrying the weight of martyrdom that enhances its sacred power. The empire that celebrates orthodoxy's triumph enters an age of transformation under the most unlikely of founders. 867 brings a peasant from Macedonia to the throne, a man who began life tending horses in imperial stables. Basil I murders his way to power, eliminating the dissolute Michael III, who had raised him from obscurity. The blood on his hands dries quickly as the new emperor proves himself among the most capable rulers Byzantium has ever known. The palace complexes of Constantinople witness immediate change. Where Michael hosted drunken revels, Basil institutes rigorous administration. The treasury, depleted by years of neglect, begins filling again as efficient taxation replaces corrupt collection. Provincial governors find themselves answerable to imperial inspectors who travel the themes reporting directly to the emperor. The peasant who once groomed horses now grooms an empire. The legal achievement towers above all else. Roman law, accumulated across centuries in contradictory compilations, receives systematic organization under Basil's direction. The Basilica emerges from this effort. 60 volumes rendering Greek what Justinian had codified in Latin 3 centuries earlier. Judges throughout the empire now access consistent legal principles in the language they actually speak. The law becomes living practice rather than antiquarian curiosity. The scriptorium workshops of Constantinople enter their golden age. Manuscript illumination reaches heights of technical perfection that later centuries will struggle to match. Gold leaf backgrounds shimmer behind figures rendered with classical precision. The artistic vocabulary of ancient Greece revived through Christian subjects. Imperial patronage ensures the finest materials reach the finest craftsmen. Purple parchment reserved for the most sacred texts. Lapis lazuli ground for the deepest blues. The palace library expands systematically. Ancient texts survive in single copies, receive careful reproduction, teams of scribes creating multiple versions for distribution to provincial centers. Classical philosophy, preserved through iconoclast decades and monastic refugees, returns to imperial attention. Photios, the greatest scholar of his age, compiles his Bibliotheca, summarizing hundreds of ancient works, some surviving only through his descriptions. Military revival accompanies cultural flowering. The eastern frontier, pressed by Arab raids for 2 centuries, begins pushing back. Basil's generals recover territories lost since Heraclius, fortress by fortress, valley by valley. The themes provide disciplined soldiers, the treasury provides regular pay, and the empire provides strategic patience. No dramatic reconquest occurs, but steady pressure yields steady gains. The churches of Constantinople receive imperial attention and imperial gold. Basil constructs the Nea Ecclesia within the palace grounds, its 5 domes representing the most ambitious sacred architecture since Justinian's age. Mosaics cover every surface, the restored icon tradition reaching new artistic expression. The emperor who seized power through murder seeks salvation through magnificent devotion. The succession proves more orderly than the founder's own rise. Leo VI, called the Wise, inherits in 886, continuing his father's legal and cultural programs. The basilica receives final completion. Imperial administration maintains its efficiency, and Constantinople's population grows toward 500,000 souls. The city becomes again what it had been under Justinian, the largest and wealthiest in the Christian world. The university tradition revives within palace precincts. Philosophy, rhetoric, geometry, and astronomy find imperial sponsorship, students gathering to study texts preserved through darker centuries. The classical inheritance, nearly lost to iconoclast destruction and Arab conquest, receives systematic transmission to new generations. Byzantium becomes the guardian of ancient wisdom, the bridge across which Greek learning will eventually reach the Latin West. The Macedonian dawn illuminates an empire transformed. The desperate survival of the 7th and 8th centuries gives way to confident expansion. The theological warfare of iconoclasm yields to artistic celebration. The administrative chaos of weak emperors surrenders to systematic governance. A peasants' dynasty establishes foundations that will support Byzantine civilization through its greatest centuries. The golden age that later generations will remember as the empire's true flowering. The Golden Age finds its ultimate expression in a ruler who embodies Byzantine power at its most terrifying and effective. 976 brings to the throne a young emperor who will spend nearly 5 decades transforming the empire into the greatest power the medieval world has yet witnessed. Basil II inherits a realm already strengthened by Macedonian reforms. But his early reign proves anything but secure. Powerful aristocratic families, grown wealthy from military commands and provincial estates, challenge imperial authority with open rebellion. The great landowners of Anatolia field private armies that rival the emperor's own forces. Civil war consumes the empire's first years under this new ruler. The young emperor learns lessons in these conflicts that shape his entire reign. He develops an implacable hostility toward the aristocratic families whose ambitions threaten imperial unity. His legislation systematically attacks great landowners, protecting peasant soldiers whose military service forms the empire's defensive backbone. The theme system, weakened by decades of aristocratic encroachment, receives renewed imperial protection. But Basil's defining struggle lies northward in the Balkans, where the Bulgarian Empire has risen to challenge Byzantine supremacy. The Bulgarian czars rule territories stretching from the Danube to the Adriatic, their power threatening Constantinople's control of the peninsula. What begins as frontier warfare becomes the consuming obsession of Basil's reign. The campaigns against Bulgaria span decades of grinding warfare. Byzantine armies march repeatedly through mountain passes and river valleys, reducing fortresses, devastating harvests, wearing down Bulgarian resistance through relentless pressure. The emperor himself leads these expeditions, sharing the hardships of his soldiers, earning their fierce loyalty through personal example. The decisive moment arrives in 1014 at the Battle of Cladion. Byzantine forces trap a Bulgarian army in a mountain pass, achieving total victory. The aftermath demonstrates the ruthlessness that earns Basil his terrible epithet. 14,000 Bulgarian prisoners received systematic blinding, with one man in every 100 left a single eye to guide his comrades home. When the Bulgarian Tsar Samuel witnesses his ruined army returning, he collapses and dies within days. By 1018, Bulgaria ceases to exist as an independent state. Its territories become Byzantine provinces, its church subordinated to Constantinople's patriarch. The empire's northern frontier reaches the Danube for the first time in centuries. Basil's armies push eastward as well, annexing Armenian kingdoms, extending Byzantine power deep into the Caucasus. The empire at Basil's death in 1025 encompasses its greatest territorial extent since Justinian's age. From southern Italy to the Euphrates, from the Danube to Syria, Byzantine authority commands respect and fear. Constantinople's population approaches 500,000, the largest city in Christendom by far. The treasury overflows with gold accumulated through decades of successful warfare and careful administration. Yet the very completeness of Basil's triumph contains seeds of future disaster. The emperor never marries, produces no heir, leaves succession to aging relatives. His systematic destruction of aristocratic power removes the military leadership class that might have defended the empire after his death. The peasant soldiers he protected will soon lose their lands to the very families he suppressed. The Bulgar slayer's reign represents Byzantine power at its absolute zenith, an empire that dominates the medieval world through military might, administrative efficiency, and accumulated wealth. But empires built on single extraordinary rulers prove fragile when that ruler departs. The Golden Age reaches its peak in 1025, and the long decline begins almost immediately thereafter. The Golden Age dies with the Bulgar slayer. Within 50 years of Basil's death in 1025, the empire he perfected begins its transformation into something smaller, weaker, and fundamentally altered. The decline begins immediately. Basil's brother, Constantine VIII, rules briefly, leaving the throne to his daughter Zoe. The empress becomes a political prize, married successively to 3 emperors who prove inadequate to the challenges facing the state: Romanios III, Michael IV, Constantine IX. Each reign brings further erosion of the military system Basil had maintained through iron discipline. The peasant soldiers who formed the backbone of Byzantine armies lose their lands to aristocratic families that Basil had suppressed. Great estates swallow small farms. The provincial military class that had defended Anatolia for centuries disappears into serfdom or urban poverty. Professional mercenaries replace citizen soldiers, their loyalty purchased rather than inherited. Constantinople's streets still gleam with marble and gold. The Hagia Sophia's dome still rises above the city like a second heaven. But the empire's foundations crack beneath the splendor. Tax revenues decline as agricultural production falls. Military budgets shrink as court factions prioritize their own enrichment over frontier defense. The religious crisis that will divide Christendom permanently builds through these decades of political weakness. Rome and Constantinople have drifted apart for centuries. Different languages, different liturgical practices, different theological emphases. The Pope claims universal authority over all Christians. The Patriarch of Constantinople insists on equality among the 5 great sees. 1054 brings the rupture. Cardinal Humbert arrives in Constantinople bearing papal demands for submission. Patriarch Michael Cerularius refuses to acknowledge Roman supremacy. The cardinal places a bull of excommunication upon the altar of Hagia Sophia and departs. The Patriarch responds with his own anathemas against Rome. The Great Schism divides Christianity into Catholic West and Orthodox East. The theological disputes, filioque clause, unleavened bread, clerical celibacy, mask deeper cultural and political divisions. 2 civilizations that once shared a common faith now regard each other with suspicion that will deepen into hatred. The military catastrophe follows the religious one. The Seljuk Turks sweep westward from Central Asia, conquering Persia, threatening Byzantine Anatolia. Emperor Romanos IV gathers the largest army the empire has fielded in generations and marches east to confront the threat. Manzikert awaits. August of 1071 finds the Byzantine army encamped near the Armenian fortress, facing Sultan Alp Arslan's Turkish cavalry. The battle begins favorably for the Romans. Then treachery strikes. Andronikos Doukas, commanding the rearguard, withdraws his forces and spreads word that the emperor has fallen. The Byzantine center collapses. Romanos fights on until captured. The first emperor taken prisoner by a foreign enemy in over 4 centuries. The Sultan treats his captive with surprising generosity, releasing him after brief negotiations. But the Empire Romanos returns to no longer recognizes his authority. Civil war erupts. Romanos is blinded and dies of his wounds. The Doukas family seizes power. Turkish raiders pour through Anatolia's undefended frontiers. Within a decade, the heartland that had sustained Byzantine power for centuries falls under Seljuk control. The empire that Basil II had extended to its greatest territorial reach contracts catastrophically. Armenia, Cappadocia, the central Anatolian plateau, regions that had provided soldiers, taxes, and agricultural surplus for generations, pass beyond imperial control. Constantinople remains magnificent, but the body supporting that magnificent head withers. The schism and the disaster prove inseparable. A united Christendom might have rallied to defend the empire. Instead, Rome watches Constantinople's humiliation with something approaching satisfaction. The crusading movement that will soon emerge from Western Europe will bring not salvation, but further catastrophe. The golden mosaics still shimmer in Byzantine churches. The purple-robed emperors still perform ancient ceremonies. But the empire that enters the final quarter of the 11th century bears little resemblance to the power Basil had commanded. Survival itself becomes the primary imperial objective, and even that modest goal will require help from the very Western Christians now separated by schism's unbridgeable divide. The help arrives wrapped in desperation. 1081 brings a new dynasty to power through the familiar Byzantine mechanism of military coup, but this time the usurper proves worthy of the purple he seizes. Alexios Komnenos inherits an empire reduced to fragments, its treasury empty, its armies scattered, its enemies pressing from every direction. The Seljuk Turks have transformed Anatolia into a patchwork of Turkish emirates. The Normans under Robert Guiscard threaten the Adriatic coast. Pechenegs raid across the Danube. The empire that once commanded the eastern Mediterranean now struggles to defend Constantinople itself. Alexios proves a master of survival through diplomacy. Where his predecessors relied on military strength, he weaves alliances, plays enemies against each other, and buys time with gold the treasury barely possesses. His daughter Anna will later chronicle these desperate years, revealing an emperor who never stops calculating, never stops negotiating, never stops fighting for every scrap of territory. The Norman threat receives priority. Guiscard's ambitions extend to Constantinople itself, and his veteran armies have already conquered Byzantine Italy. Alexios turns to Venice, offering commercial privileges that will eventually prove ruinous in exchange for naval support. The Venetian fleet helps blunt Norman expansion, though the price paid in trading rights begins the slow hemorrhage of Byzantine economic sovereignty. Then comes the unexpected salvation that will prove equally dangerous. 1095 brings envoys from Pope Urban II, responding to Alexios' request for Western mercenaries. The emperor seeks professional soldiers to help reconquer Anatolia. What arrives instead transforms the medieval world. The First Crusade brings not hundreds but tens of thousands of Western warriors streaming toward Constantinople. Alexios watches with growing alarm as armies larger than any he commands camp outside his walls. These crusaders seek Jerusalem, not Byzantine restoration, and their leaders include Normans whose kinsmen recently threatened the empire. The emperor's diplomacy reaches its finest expression. He extracts oaths of fealty from crusader leaders, promising supplies and guides in exchange for recognition of Byzantine claims to reconquered territories. The negotiations prove exhausting, each Western lord requiring separate handling, separate promises, separate demonstrations of imperial wealth and power. The Crusaders march east, and Alexios follows at careful distance. Nicaea falls in 1097, returned to Byzantine control as promised. The ancient city that sheltered Iconoclasm's opponents now anchors the empire's Anatolian recovery. Other coastal cities follow, their Turkish garrisons overwhelmed by Crusader fervor. But the partnership fractures at Antioch. The Crusaders capture the great Syrian city after brutal siege, and Bohemond of Taranto refuses to surrender it despite his oath. The Norman adventurer establishes his own principality, and Alexios lacks the strength to compel compliance. The pattern repeats across the Levant as Crusader states emerge independent of Byzantine authority. Still, the empire benefits enormously. Western Anatolia returns to imperial control. The Turkish Emirates, caught between Crusader advance and Byzantine pressure, lose their momentum. Constantinople's hinterland expands for the first time in decades. The Komnenian Restoration begins transforming desperate survival into genuine recovery. Alexios rules until 1118, bequeathing to his son John an empire vastly stronger than the wreck he inherited. The Komnenian system he creates relies on family loyalty, with relatives filling crucial military and administrative posts. This nepotism provides stability, but concentrates power dangerously. John II continues his father's work with less diplomatic finesse, but greater military skill. His campaigns push deeper into Anatolia, recovering territories lost since Manzikert. The empire that seemed doomed in 1081 now projects power across the eastern Mediterranean once more. The Crusader states prove troublesome neighbors, but useful buffers against Muslim powers. Byzantine diplomacy plays Latin princes against each other, maintaining influence without committing precious military resources. The arrangement works imperfectly, but sufficiently. Yet the restoration contains fatal weaknesses. The commercial privileges granted to Venice and later Genoa drain wealth eastward. The Crusader presence introduces Western ambitions into regions Byzantium considers its own. The family-based Komnenian system functions only while capable emperors rule. The golden mosaics receive new commissions. Constantinople's population grows. Trade flourishes through the Bosphorus. The empire entering the mid-12th century appears recovered, even resurgent, but the foundations rest on arrangements that will prove catastrophic when tested by lesser rulers and greedier allies. The foundations of Byzantine power rest not merely on armies and walls, but on something equally formidable, the elaborate theater of imperial ceremony that transforms mortal rulers into living icons of divine authority. The great palace complex sprawls across terraces descending from the Hippodrome toward the Sea of Marmara, a labyrinth of halls, gardens, courtyards, and chapels accumulated over 8 centuries. Within this sacred geography, every movement carries meaning. Every gesture reinforces the cosmic order that places the emperor at the intersection of heaven and earth. The Porphyra chamber holds particular significance. This room lined with purple marble witnesses the birth of legitimate heirs, granting them the designation born in the purple that distinguishes true succession from usurpation. The purple itself carries weight beyond color. Tyrian dye extracted from murex shells costs more than gold by weight. Only emperors may wear the full purple robe. The color becomes synonymous with sovereignty itself. Coronation ceremonies unfold according to protocols refined across centuries. The patriarch crowns the new emperor in Hagia Sophia, but the army's acclamation and the people's acceptance complete the sacred transaction. The emperor receives not merely political authority, but a divine mandate to rule as God's representative on earth. Court titles proliferate in bewildering hierarchy. The Sebastocrator, the Caesar, the Nobilissimus, the Curapolits, the Magistros, the Anthypatos, the Patricios. Each rank carries specific privileges, specific ceremonial positions, specific robes and insignia. The Book of Ceremonies compiled under Constantine VII, Porphyrogenitos codifies these protocols with obsessive precision, ensuring that proper order governs every imperial occasion. Foreign ambassadors experience this theater as calculated intimidation. The throne room contains mechanical wonders, golden lions that roar, bronze birds that sing, a throne that rises toward the ceiling while visitors prostrate themselves. When they look up, the emperor has transformed, now wearing different robes, now elevated above mortal reach. The message requires no translation. Dining rituals reinforce hierarchy through seating arrangements, dish sequences, and the privilege of sharing the emperor's table. The emperor eats alone at an elevated position, while guests recline at lower tables according to rank. Golden plates and jeweled cups display wealth beyond imagination. Eunuchs serve in silence, their presence ensuring that no ambitious nobleman gains intimate access to imperial power. The Hippodrome provides the empire's greatest public ceremony. Chariot races between blues and greens offer more than entertainment. The emperor appears in the Kathisma, the imperial box connecting palace to stadium, receiving the people's acclamations. The factions chant responses to imperial pronouncements. Grievances find voice through ritualized dialogue. The races channel political energies that might otherwise explode into rebellion. Religious processions weave through Constantinople's streets on feast days, the emperor walking among relics and icons, demonstrating piety while displaying power. The Virgin's robe, fragments of the true cross, the mandilion bearing Christ's miraculous image. These treasures belong to the empire, their protection a sacred duty that legitimizes imperial authority. The women's quarters, the gynaeconitis, operate according to their own protocols. Empresses wield influence through access, through the bedchamber's intimacy, through the raising of heirs. Augusta, the title of reigning empress, carries genuine authority. Theodora proved that an empress could govern. Irene proved that a woman could rule alone. The purple chamber witnesses female power as surely as male. Eunuchs occupy a unique ceremonial space. Neither fully male nor female in Byzantine understanding, they serve as trusted intermediaries, chamberlains, generals, patriarchs. Their inability to found dynasties makes them safe servants of imperial power. The parakoimomenos, the grand chamberlain who sleeps beside the emperor's chamber, often wields more influence than any titled nobleman. This elaborate machinery serves purposes beyond mere display. Ceremony creates legitimacy. Protocol prevents chaos. Ritual transforms the violence of succession into sacred continuity. The empire survives because its institutions transcend individual rulers, because the purple robe matters more than who wears it. The theater continues even as the empire contracts. Diminished territories still produce emperors who perform ancient ceremonies, who receive ambassadors according to protocols designed for world dominion. The forms persist because they constitute Byzantine identity itself. Beyond the palace walls, beyond the sacred ceremonies and purple chambers, Constantinople pulses with the energy of 1,000,000 souls. The city that emperors rule from ritual distance lives and breathes through its markets, its guilds, its ordinary inhabitants who transform Byzantine power into daily reality. The Mesi stretches from the Augustaian Forum near Hagia Sophia westward to the Golden Gate, a colonnaded avenue of marble that serves as the empire's commercial spine. Morning light filters through porticos, where merchants arrange silks from China, spices from India, furs from the northern forests. The street widens into forums named for emperors long dead, each plaza hosting specialized trades that have occupied the same locations for centuries. Guild organization governs every aspect of commercial life. The Book of the Eparch, compiled under Leo VI, codifies regulations that transform chaos into order. Silk merchants occupy designated sections, their wares inspected by imperial officials who ensure quality and prevent fraud. Perfumers cluster near the palace, their aromatic products considered too precious for random distribution. Bakers receive grain allocations from state warehouses, their loaves weighed and priced according to strict formulas. The harbor of the Golden Horn receives ships from every corner of the known world. Venetian galleys unload Flemish cloth and German silver. Arab dhows bring African ivory and Indian pearls despite political hostilities. Russian traders descend the Dnieper with slaves, honey, and wax, exchanging northern products for Byzantine manufactured goods. The empire's commercial reach extends far beyond its military frontiers. Artisan workshops produce goods that command premium prices throughout the medieval world. Enamel work from Constantinople adorns crowns in distant kingdoms. Byzantine silk, woven with patterns reserved by imperial decree, serves as diplomatic currency more valuable than gold. Manuscript illuminators create books that preserve classical learning while inventing new artistic vocabularies. The hippodrome remains the city's emotional center long after chariot racing loses its political significance. The Great Arena seats 80,000 spectators beneath Egyptian obelisks and bronze monuments looted from across the ancient world. Blues and greens still compete, though their factions no longer threaten emperors as they did during Justinian's reign. The races provide entertainment, the stands provide social mixing, the imperial box provides visible connection between ruler and ruled. Neighborhoods organize around churches, each parish forming a community within the greater urban whole. Bakers know their customers by name. Tavern keepers extend credit to regulars. Neighborhood associations maintain streets, organize festivals, provide mutual aid during crises. The city functions through these intimate networks, invisible to official records. Water flows through aqueducts built by Valens and Justinian, feeding cisterns that honeycomb the city's foundations. The basilica cistern alone holds 80,000 cubic meters, its forest of columns supporting vaulted ceilings that create underground cathedrals of engineering. Public fountains distribute this precious resource, their locations determining neighborhood boundaries as surely as walls. Hospitals founded by imperial charity provide medical care unavailable elsewhere in the medieval world. The Pantocrator monastery complex includes separate facilities for different conditions, staffed by physicians trained in traditions stretching back to Hippocrates and Galen. Byzantine medicine preserves and advances classical knowledge while the West forgets. Education flourishes in schools attached to churches and in private academies, where philosophers debate Plato and Aristotle. Literacy rates exceed anything in contemporary Europe. Merchants keep accounts, artisans read guild regulations, ordinary citizens compose letters and contracts. The empire runs on paperwork, and paperwork requires readers. The city's population fluctuates with plague, siege, and economic fortune, but Constantinople remains the largest urban center in Christendom for most of the medieval period. Perhaps 500,000 souls crowd within the Theodosian walls during prosperous decades, their density creating challenges of sanitation, fire prevention, and social order that Byzantine administrators address with varying success. This urban complexity produces the wealth that funds armies, builds churches, and sustains imperial ceremony. The purple robes worn in the sacred palace derive their color from murex shells processed by guild craftsmen. The gold that covers mosaic walls flows from commercial taxes collected at harbor gates. Empire and city exist in symbiosis, each sustaining the other through mechanisms refined across centuries of continuous habitation. The gold that sustains commerce also sustains salvation. Byzantine spirituality expresses itself through material splendor, transforming precious metals and colored glass into windows onto the divine. This theology of beauty shapes Orthodox Christianity across centuries, creating a visual language that communicates sacred truth to the literate and illiterate alike. Church interiors function as theological statements rendered in stone and light. Entering a Byzantine sanctuary means stepping into a carefully ordered cosmos, where every surface carries meaning. The dome represents heaven itself, and there Christ Pantocrator gazes down with eyes that seem to follow worshippers regardless of their position below. The apse behind the altar displays the Theotokos, the God-bearer, her arms raised in eternal intercession. Saints process along the walls in hierarchical arrangement, their golden backgrounds eliminating earthly space and time to suggest eternal presence. Mosaic technique achieves effects impossible through paint alone. Craftsmen set tesserae at slightly varied angles, causing surfaces to shimmer and shift as candlelight moves across them. Gold-backed glass cubes catch and multiply illumination, making walls appear to glow from within. The deliberate irregularity creates living surfaces that breathe with the liturgy, transforming static images into participants in worship. Mount Athos emerges as monasticism's supreme expression within the Byzantine world. The Holy Mountains Peninsula, jutting into the Aegean, becomes a republic of prayer where dozens of monasteries pursue spiritual perfection according to varying rules. Some communities embrace cenobitic life, sharing all things in common. Others permit hermits to dwell in caves and isolated cells, pursuing hesychast contemplation in radical solitude. The monastic day revolves around the liturgical hours, punctuating darkness and light with prescribed prayers. Monks rise before dawn for orthros, the morning office, their chanting echoing through Catholicon churches decorated with the same mosaic programs found in Constantinople. The divine liturgy follows, the Eucharistic celebration that forms Orthodox worship's heart. Vespers marks evening's arrival, Compline prepares for sleep, and the cycle continues without interruption across generations. Manuscript production preserves classical learning alongside sacred texts. Monastic scriptoria copy not only Gospels and patristic writings, but also ancient Greek philosophy, science, and literature. Byzantine monks transmit Plato and Aristotle, Euclid and Ptolemy, preserving knowledge that Western Europe has largely forgotten. This preservation proves crucial for later centuries when Renaissance scholars seek ancient wisdom. Icon veneration, restored after Iconoclasm's defeat, develops sophisticated theological justification. The Seventh Ecumenical Council establishes that honor paid to images passes to their prototypes, distinguishing veneration from worship. Icons become meeting points between earthly and heavenly realms, their standardized forms ensuring that worshippers encounter not artistic invention, but transmitted truth. Hagia Sophia's interior demonstrates these principles at imperial scale. 40 windows pierce the great dome's base, creating a ring of light that makes the structure appear to float unsupported. Justinian's architects calculated these effects deliberately, engineering transcendence through mathematics. The building's acoustics amplify liturgical chanting, surrounding worshippers with sound that seems to descend from heaven itself. Provincial churches replicate Constantinople's models according to local resources. Ravenna's mosaics preserve 6th century programs in remarkable condition, their imperial portraits and biblical narratives glittering as they did when Justinian ruled. Thessaloniki's churches demonstrate how Byzantine aesthetic principles adapt across centuries, each generation adding layers to the accumulated tradition. This visual theology shapes Orthodox identity more profoundly than written doctrine. Peasants who cannot read absorb faith through images, learning sacred history from mosaic narratives and icon programs. The church building itself teaches, its architecture and decoration, forming a comprehensive catechesis available to all who enter. The faith preserved in gold and glass faces its greatest trial not from infidel armies, but from fellow Christians. The catastrophe that befalls Constantinople in 1204 represents betrayal so profound that its wounds never fully heal, transforming the empire's trajectory forever. The Angelos dynasty that seizes power in 1185 embodies Byzantine decline in human form. Isaac II proves militarily incompetent, losing territory to Normans, Bulgarians, and Seljuks, while the treasury hemorrhages gold. His brother Alexios III blinds him in 1195, continuing the pattern of misrule that leaves the empire vulnerable to predators circling the weakened state. The Fourth Crusade departs Venice in 1202, ostensibly bound for Egypt and the liberation of Jerusalem. But debts to Venetian shipbuilders and the ambitions of the blind Doge Enrico Dandolo redirect this armed pilgrimage toward Constantinople. The young Alexios, son of the blinded Isaac, promises Crusaders impossible rewards for restoring his father: 200,000 silver marks, Byzantine military support, and submission of the Orthodox Church to Rome. The Crusader fleet appears before Constantinople in June 1203. The city's inhabitants watch in disbelief as Christian banners approach walls that have repelled Persians, Avars, Arabs, and Bulgars for 8 centuries. The Angelus regime collapses with remarkable speed, Alexios III fleeing without serious resistance. The blind Isaac and his son briefly rule as co-emperors, but they cannot deliver promised payments to their Western liberators. Tensions escalate through the winter of 1203 into 1204. Byzantine mobs murder the young Alexios in a palace coup. The Crusaders, unpaid and stranded, decide to take by force what negotiation has failed to deliver. On April 9th, 1204, the assault begins. The first attack fails against walls that have never fallen to direct assault. But 4 days later, Venetian ships manage to bridge the gap between their vessels and the sea walls near the Blachernai quarter. Soldiers pour through breaches, and the defense collapses with shocking suddenness. The greatest city in Christendom falls to Christian conquerors. What follows surpasses any previous sack in the city's history. For 3 days, Crusaders rampage through streets that have accumulated 9 centuries of treasure. Churches become targets rather than sanctuaries. Soldiers strip silver from the altar of Hagia Sophia, smashing the great iconostasis for its precious metals. A prostitute reportedly sits on the patriarch's throne, singing bawdy songs in the holiest space of Eastern Christianity. The libraries burn. Manuscripts preserving classical knowledge, patristic theology, and imperial records feed flames that illuminate the horror. Bronze statues that have adorned the hippodrome since Constantine's day are melted for coinage. The 4 horses of gilded bronze that survive find new homes atop St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, trophies of Christian fratricide. Relics scatter across Western Europe. The true cross fragments, the Virgin's robe, saints' bones accumulated over centuries, all become plunder distributed among Crusaders and their ecclesiastical sponsors. Churches from Paris to Cologne suddenly possess Byzantine treasures torn from their sacred contexts. The Latin Empire established in Constantinople proves a hollow conquest. Baldwin of Flanders becomes emperor of a realm that controls little beyond the capital's walls. Byzantine successor states emerge immediately. The Empire of Nicaea in western Anatolia, the Despotate of Epirus in Greece, the Empire of Trebizond on the Black Sea coast. The unified empire shatters into competing fragments, each claiming legitimacy. The psychological wound cuts deepest. Orthodox Christians never forget this betrayal by their supposed brothers in faith. The schism of 1054 had been a dispute among theologians. 1204 becomes a blood memory passed through generations. When Ottoman armies later threaten Constantinople, some Byzantines will prefer the Sultan's turban to the cardinal's hat. So deep runs the hatred born in these April days. The hatred born in April 1204 becomes the seed of resurrection. Across the Bosphorus, in the Anatolian highlands where Latin knights dare not venture, Byzantine civilization refuses to die. The empire fragments, yet each fragment carries the dream of restoration burning like an eternal flame. Nicaea rises first and strongest. This ancient city, where church councils once defined Christian doctrine, becomes the refuge of imperial legitimacy. Theodore Lascaris, son-in-law of a deposed emperor, gathers fleeing nobles, displaced clergy, and soldiers who escaped the slaughter. Within months of Constantinople's fall, a government in exile takes shape behind Nicaea's formidable walls. The Anatolian landscape proves both sanctuary and crucible. Mountain passes guard against Latin pursuit, while fertile valleys sustain the refugee population. Theodore establishes his court with deliberate ceremony, maintaining every protocol of Constantinople's palace rituals. Purple robes still drape imperial shoulders. Gold still gleams on ceremonial vestments. The theater of Byzantine power continues unbroken, though performed now in provincial settings. Rival claimants emerge simultaneously. The despotate of Epirus controls northwestern Greece under the Angelus family, those same incompetent rulers whose weakness invited catastrophe. The empire of Trebizond, founded by Alexios Komnenos, grandson of the great Andronikos, claims the Black Sea coast. 3 Byzantine successor states compete for the right to reclaim Constantinople. Nicaea proves most capable. Theodore Lascaris defeats the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum at Antioch on the Meander in 1211, securing eastern borders. He repels Latin attempts to crush the exile state before it can consolidate. His marriage alliances weave diplomatic webs across the Orthodox world. When Theodore dies in 1221, he leaves not a refugee camp, but a functioning empire. His successor, John III Vatatzes, transforms Nicaea into something remarkable. This emperor, remembered as John the Merciful, builds an administration that rivals Constantinople's golden age. Agriculture flourishes under imperial encouragement. Silk production expands. Trade routes redirect through Nicaean ports. The exile state grows wealthy while Latin Constantinople decays. The contrast becomes stark. Latin emperors pawn the crown of thorns to Venetian bankers, strip lead from palace roofs for coinage, watch their realm shrink year by year. Nicaean emperors accumulate treasure, expand territory, prepare methodically for the reconquest that faith promises must come. John Vatatzes pushes into Europe, capturing Thessaloniki's hinterland, pressing toward Constantinople itself. His armies recover Thrace piece by piece. Each fortress taken, each province restored, brings the dream closer to reality. When John dies in 1254, Nicaean forces stand within striking distance of the Queen of Cities. His son, Theodore II, continues the work despite failing health. Scholars gather at the Nicaean court, preserving manuscripts, composing histories, maintaining the intellectual traditions that make Byzantium more than mere territory. The emperor himself writes philosophical treatises, proving that exile has not diminished Byzantine learning. The final act belongs to Michael Palaiologos. This ambitious general seizes the regency for the child emperor John IV, then seizes the throne itself in 1259. Ruthless and brilliant, Michael understands that opportunity ripens. Latin Constantinople weakens daily. The moment approaches. In 1261, a small Nicaean force under General Alexios Strategopoulos approaches Constantinople on reconnaissance. Finding the walls virtually undefended, the Latin garrison away on campaign, Strategopoulos acts with stunning initiative. His soldiers enter through a secret passage. By dawn, Byzantine banners fly again over the ancient capital. Michael VIII enters Constantinople in triumph on the 15th of August, 1261, walking barefoot behind an icon of the Virgin Mary. 57 years of exile end. The empire returns to its eternal city. Yet, the Constantinople Michael reclaims bears deep scars from Latin occupation, and the restored empire will never recover the strength squandered in those decades of fragmentation. The scars run deeper than stone. Michael VIII walks through a capital transformed by decades of Latin neglect, past churches stripped of their bronze doors, forums emptied of their ancient statuary, palaces with roofs collapsed and gardens overgrown. The Constantinople he reclaims in 1261 bears little resemblance to the queen of cities his predecessors ruled. Where once 1 million souls crowded the streets, perhaps 50,000 remain, huddled in scattered neighborhoods separated by fields and ruins. The Paleologos dynasty inherits an empire diminished beyond recognition. The treasury stands empty, drained by the costs of reconquest. The provinces that once fed the capital remain in foreign hands. Venetian and Genoese merchants control the maritime trade that should enrich Byzantine coffers. The army that recovered Constantinople numbers barely enough to garrison its walls. Yet, Michael proves himself a master of survival through diplomacy rather than force. He plays Western powers against each other with consummate skill, negotiating with popes and kings, offering church union to forestall crusades, promising what he cannot deliver to buy precious time. The Union of Lyons in 1274 temporarily reconciles Eastern and Western churches, purchasing Byzantine security at the cost of popular fury. Constantinople's population riots against their emperor's religious compromises. The restored capital slowly revives. Craftsmen return to abandoned workshops. Churches receive new icons to replace those stolen or destroyed. The Chora monastery undergoes magnificent renovation, its walls covered with mosaics and frescoes that represent Byzantine art's final flowering. These images possess an emotional intensity unknown in earlier centuries, faces expressing genuine human feeling, bodies moving with natural grace. Andronikos II succeeds his father in 1282, inheriting impossible challenges. He repudiates the hated church union, restoring Orthodox independence but reopening the empire to Western aggression. His reign witnesses the catastrophic rise of Ottoman power in Anatolia, Turkish warriors steadily conquering the provinces that had sustained Byzantine strength for centuries. The emperor disbands the navy to save money, a decision of staggering short-sightedness. Without ships, Constantinople cannot protect its maritime lifelines. Genoese merchants in their colony of Galata across the Golden Horn grow richer than the emperor himself, their customs revenues dwarfing those collected by Byzantine officials. Yet, amid political decline, intellectual life flourishes with remarkable vigor. Scholars gather in Constantinople's remaining monasteries and private academies, copying ancient manuscripts, composing commentaries, preserving classical learning. Theodora Medicae's grand logothete under Andronikos embodies this paradox of cultural brilliance amid imperial collapse. He rebuilds the Chora monastery while writing philosophical treatises, patronizing artists while watching the empire shrink. The manuscripts produced in these twilight decades possess extraordinary beauty. Scribes working in palace scriptoria create illuminated texts that rival any produced in Byzantine history. Gold leaf gleams on purple parchment. Miniature paintings depict emperors, saints, and scholars with unprecedented sophistication. These books will eventually travel westward, carrying Greek learning to Italian humanists hungry for classical wisdom. Civil war erupts in 1321 when Andronikos III rebels against his grandfather. The conflict devastates remaining provinces, each faction hiring foreign mercenaries who ravage the lands they supposedly defend. Serbian and Bulgarian rulers exploit Byzantine weakness, annexing territories that had belonged to the empire for centuries. The restored empire survives through sheer tenacity and the absence of any power strong enough to deliver the final blow. Constantinople's walls still stand, still formidable despite neglected repairs. The city's strategic position still commands the straits between two continents. Orthodox faith still binds the population to their emperor, God's chosen representative on earth. But the Paleologoa rule a ghost of former greatness, an empire of memories and manuscripts rather than armies and provinces. The cultural achievements of these decades cannot disguise the fundamental reality of irreversible decline. Each passing year brings Ottoman forces closer to the ancient walls. The ghost of former greatness begins to devour itself. In 1341, the death of Andronikos III leaves a 9-year-old heir and a regency that fractures the empire more completely than any foreign invasion. John Cantacuzene, the dead emperor's closest advisor, claims guardianship of young John V. The empress mother, Anna of Savoy, refuses to yield power. Civil war erupts between factions that care nothing for the empire's survival, only their own advancement. The conflict that follows represents Byzantine politics at its most self-destructive. Cantacuzene raises armies in Thrace while Anna fortifies Constantinople. Both sides seek foreign allies with catastrophic short-sightedness. Serbian forces march into Macedonia, claiming territories as payment for assistance. Bulgarian armies seize Thracian fortresses. Most devastating of all, Cantacuzene invites Ottoman warriors across the straits, promising them plunder and eventually a permanent foothold in Europe. The Ottomans who answer this invitation recognize opportunity beyond any Byzantine calculation. Sultan Orhan sends thousands of warriors who learn European terrain, study fortress weaknesses, and establish relationships that will prove invaluable for future conquests. The Civil War hands them intelligence and experience that no amount of military campaigning could have provided so easily. 6 years of fratricidal conflict devastate provinces already weakened by decades of decline. Farms lie abandoned as peasants flee competing armies. Cities change hands repeatedly, each occupation bringing fresh looting. The empire's remaining military strength exhausts itself fighting fellow Romans rather than external enemies. Cantacuzene eventually triumphs, entering Constantinople in 1347 and ruling as senior emperor alongside young John V. But his victory proves hollow. The empire he inherits has shrunk catastrophically during the Civil War. Serbian expansion under Stefan Dušan creates a rival empire stretching from the Adriatic to the Aegean. Ottoman forces now hold permanent positions in Thrace, no longer guests but conquerors. Then comes the plague. The Black Death reaches Constantinople in 1347, carried by Genoese ships from Crimean trading posts. The disease spreads through the crowded capital with terrifying speed, killing rich and poor, Greek and Latin, soldier and monk without discrimination. Bodies pile faster than burial parties can collect them. Entire neighborhoods fall silent. The plague returns repeatedly throughout these decades, each visitation claiming thousands more lives. A population already diminished by economic collapse and emigration shrinks further. Skilled craftsmen die without training apprentices. Merchants perish with their commercial networks. Soldiers succumb before reaching any battlefield. Cantacuzene abdicates in 1354, retiring to a monastery where he writes memoirs defending his disastrous policies. John V rules alone over an empire that barely deserves the name. Constantinople remains, its walls still formidable, its churches still magnificent. But the provinces have largely vanished, swallowed by Serbian expansion, Ottoman conquest, and simple abandonment. The Ottomans consolidate their European holdings with methodical patience. Adrianople falls in 1369, becoming their new capital and demonstrating that Constantinople no longer commands the Balkans. Byzantine emperors become Ottoman vassals, required to provide military assistance against fellow Christians. The humiliation runs deep, but survival demands accommodation. John V travels to Rome in 1369, personally converting to Catholicism in hopes of securing Western military aid. The gesture proves futile. Western powers offer sympathy and theological lectures, but no armies. The emperor returns empty-handed, his conversion earning only the contempt of his Orthodox subjects, without gaining any practical benefit. The empire survives these decades through Ottoman tolerance rather than Byzantine strength. The sultans find a weakened Constantinople useful as a buffer and a source of tribute. Complete conquest can wait, while more pressing campaigns demand attention elsewhere. The ancient capital exists on borrowed time, its fate determined in Ottoman councils rather than Byzantine palaces. The borrowed time runs shorter with each passing year. Manuel II ascends to a throne that commands little beyond Constantinople's walls, inheriting an empire reduced to a city-state surrounded by Ottoman territory. His reign begins in 1391 under circumstances that would crush lesser spirits, yet this scholarly emperor refuses to accept the inevitable. Manuel possesses gifts unusual for a Byzantine ruler facing extinction. He writes theological treatises, composes elegant letters, and converses with Western intellectuals as an equal. These refined qualities serve an unexpected purpose when he embarks on the most remarkable diplomatic mission in Byzantine history. In 1399, the emperor himself travels westward, seeking the military aid that ambassadors have failed to secure. The journey takes Manuel through Italy, France, and England over 3 years. Western courts receive him with genuine fascination. Here stands a living Roman emperor, heir to Constantine and Justinian, speaking Greek as his ancestors spoke it 1,000 years before. King Henry IV of England hosts elaborate banquets. The French court marvels at this exotic visitor from the Christian East. Chroniclers record the emperor's dignity, his learning, his quiet desperation, masked by imperial composure. The reception proves magnificent. The practical results prove negligible. Western monarchs offer sympathy, promises, and small financial gifts. They do not offer armies. The 100 Years' War consumes English and French resources. Italian states pursue their own rivalries. The papacy demands religious submission as the price of assistance. Manuel returns to Constantinople in 1403, having gained nothing but a deeper understanding of Western indifference. Providence grants an unexpected reprieve. Timur the Lame, the Central Asian conqueror, shatters Ottoman power at the Battle of Ankara in 1402. Sultan Bayezid I dies in captivity. His sons plunged the Ottoman state into civil war lasting over a decade. Constantinople breathes freely for the first time in generations, though Manuel understands this respite cannot last. The emperor uses these years wisely, strengthening walls, rebuilding depleted treasuries, playing Ottoman princes against each other. When Mehmed I reunifies the Sultanate, he maintains peaceful relations with Byzantium, grateful for Manuel's neutrality during the succession struggle. The old emperor witnesses his empire's temporary stabilization before death claims him in 1425. His son John VIII inherits a situation already deteriorating. Murad II, the new sultan, proves far more aggressive than his father. Ottoman pressure resumes with renewed intensity. John pursues the only strategy remaining, securing Western military intervention through religious union with Rome. The Council of Florence in 1438 and 39 represents Byzantium's final theological gamble. John travels west with his patriarch and leading churchmen, negotiating the terms of Orthodox submission to papal authority. The Union document signed in 1439 proclaims the churches reunited, the Filioque controversy resolved, papal supremacy acknowledged. The agreement exists only on parchment. Orthodox populations throughout the East reject the union with passionate fury. Monks denounce the emperor as a traitor to the faith. The phrase spreads through Constantinople streets that better the sultan's turban than the cardinal's hat. The religious unity meant to save Byzantium instead deepens internal divisions at the worst possible moment. Western response to the union proves equally disappointing. A crusade finally materializes in 1444, armies gathering from Hungary, Poland, and other Christian states. The campaign advances into Ottoman territory with initial success. Then disaster strikes at Varna on the Black Sea coast. Ottoman forces annihilate the Crusader army. King Vladislav of Poland and Hungary dies on the battlefield. The last serious Western attempt to save Constantinople ends in catastrophic defeat. John VIII dies in 1448, worn out by failure and despair. The empire he leaves behind consists of Constantinople itself, a few Aegean islands, and the Morea in southern Greece. Ottoman territory surrounds the capital completely. The Theodosian walls still stand, but the spirit that built them flickers toward extinction. The dying light grows dimmer with each passing season. The crown passes to the last man who will bear the title of Roman Emperor. Constantine XI, Palaiologos, arrives in Constantinople in March of 1449, having ruled the Morea as despot. He enters a city that has become a shadow haunting its own ruins. Perhaps 50,000 souls inhabit a space once home to 500,000. Entire districts lie abandoned, their churches crumbling, their forums overgrown with weeds. The new emperor surveys walls built to protect a metropolis and finds them guarding a collection of villages separated by orchards and empty fields. Yet Constantine refuses despair. He immediately begins strengthening fortifications, stockpiling provisions, seeking alliances wherever they might be found. His appeals reach Venice, Genoa, the papacy, the kingdoms of Western Europe. The responses prove lukewarm at best. The old religious division between Orthodox and Catholic Christianity poisons every negotiation. Union with Rome, accepted by previous emperors in desperate hope of Western aid, remains deeply unpopular among Constantinople's population. Many prefer Ottoman turbans to papal tiaras. Sultan Mehmed II ascends the Ottoman throne in 1451 at 19 years of age. This young ruler harbors an obsession that will reshape the world. Constantinople haunts his dreams. He studies its walls, commissions massive bronze cannons capable of hurling stone balls weighing over half a ton, and constructs a fortress on the European shore of the Bosphorus to strangle the city's Black Sea trade. The noose tightens month by month. Spring of 1453 brings the final reckoning. Ottoman armies numbering perhaps 80,000 men surround Constantinople. Against them stand fewer than 7,000 defenders, including a small contingent of Genoese volunteers under the capable Giovanni Giustiniani. The disparity seems insurmountable, yet the Theodosian walls have repelled every assault for 1,000 years. Their triple fortifications, their moats, their towers spaced for overlapping fields of fire represent the accumulated military wisdom of centuries. The Great Bombardment begins in early April. Massive cannons thunder day and night, their stone projectiles slowly pulverizing ancient masonry. The defenders work frantically to repair breaches, filling gaps with timber, earth, and rubble. Ottoman assaults crash against the walls repeatedly, only to be thrown back by desperate defenders fighting for their homes, their faith, their civilization. The siege stretches through April into May. Ottoman ships drag overland on greased logs to bypass the chain blocking the Golden Horn. Tunnels dug toward the walls are detected and destroyed by countermines. Each Ottoman stratagem meets Byzantine countermeasure, yet the mathematics of attrition favor the besiegers. Defenders fall and cannot be replaced. Ammunition dwindles, exhaustion accumulates. May 29th dawns after a night of final prayers in Hagia Sophia, where Orthodox and Catholic Christians worship together for the first and last time. Constantine XI addresses his men, speaking of honor, faith, and the glory of dying for one's country. Then he takes his place on the walls. The final assault begins before dawn. Wave after wave of Ottoman soldiers throw themselves against the battered fortifications. Giustiniani falls wounded and is carried from the field, demoralizing the defense. A small gate left unlocked allows Ottoman soldiers into the space between walls. Confusion spreads, the defense crumbles. Constantine XI tears off his imperial insignia and charges into the Ottoman ranks. He is never seen again. Legend claims his body was never identified among the fallen. The last Roman emperor vanishes into the chaos of his city's death, becoming myth in the moment of his ending. By noon, Ottoman banners fly from the towers. Mehmed II rides through the shattered gates to claim his prize. He enters Hagia Sophia and orders it converted to a mosque. The building that witnessed Justinian's triumph now witnesses the empire's extinction. 11 centuries of continuous Roman rule end in a single spring morning. The empire dies, but its soul scatters across the world like seeds carried on an autumn wind. Within months of Constantinople's fall, Greek scholars who fled westward begin teaching in Italian courts, carrying manuscripts that had survived 1,000 years in Byzantine libraries. These fragile pages contain Plato and Aristotle, Euclid and Ptolemy, the accumulated wisdom of classical antiquity preserved through centuries of careful copying in monastic scriptoria. Florence, Venice, and Rome receive this inheritance, and the Renaissance accelerates into full bloom. The Orthodox faith finds new champions in the north. Moscow's grand princes marry Byzantine princesses and adopt the double-headed eagle. Ivan III takes a Paleologos bride and proclaims Moscow the Third Rome, inheritor of Constantinople's sacred mission. The Russian Church preserves Byzantine liturgy, iconography, and theological tradition across the vast Eurasian steppe. What Constantinople guarded for 11 centuries now finds shelter beneath golden onion domes. The physical monuments endure against all expectation. Hagia Sophia stands transformed but undiminished, its mosaics plastered over but not destroyed, waiting centuries for rediscovery. The Theodosian walls, though breached, remain standing as testament to engineering genius. Ravenna's churches preserve Byzantine mosaics in their original splendor, Justinian and Theodora gazing eternally from walls of gold tesserae. Mount Athos continues its monastic traditions unbroken, Orthodox monks still chanting prayers first sung when Constantinople ruled the world. Roman law, codified under Justinian, becomes the foundation of European legal systems. The Corpus Juris Civilis shapes the Napoleonic Code and through it influences legal traditions across continents. Every modern court that distinguishes between civil and criminal law, that recognizes contracts and property rights, builds upon Byzantine foundations. The artistic legacy proves equally enduring. Orthodox iconography spreads from Serbia to Ethiopia, from Georgia to Alaska. The distinctive style of Byzantine sacred art, with its gold backgrounds and hieratic figures, influences religious painting for centuries. Even Western artists study Byzantine techniques, and the solemn faces of medieval Madonnas echo icons painted in Constantinople's workshops. Diplomatic protocols established in the Great Palace become templates for European courts. The elaborate ceremonies, the careful gradations of honor, the strategic use of magnificence to impress foreign envoys, all derive from Byzantine practice. When later monarchs surround themselves with ritual splendor, they unconsciously imitate emperors who ruled from the Bosphorus. The very idea of a Christian empire defending civilization against external threats shapes European consciousness for centuries. Crusaders, Habsburg emperors, and Russian czars all imagine themselves continuing the Byzantine mission. The concept of Christendom as a unified civilization requiring defense originates in Constantinople's long struggle against Persian, Arab, and Turkish pressure. Today, over 300 million Orthodox Christians maintain traditions shaped in Byzantine churches. The Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, composed in 4th century Constantinople, is still celebrated daily. Icons painted according to Byzantine canons still receive veneration. The theological formulations hammered out in Byzantine councils still define Orthodox belief. Scholars continue discovering Byzantine influence in unexpected places. Arabic translations of Greek texts, preserved and transmitted through Byzantine intermediaries, shaped Islamic philosophy and science. Armenian and Georgian cultures bear deep Byzantine imprints. Even distant Ethiopia received its Christianity through channels connected to Constantinople. The empire that bridged antiquity and modernity, that preserved classical learning through dark centuries, that defended Christian civilization for over a millennium, never truly ended. It transformed, scattered, and seeded new growths across the world. Every time someone reads Aristotle, admires a mosaic, or attends an Orthodox service, Byzantium lives again. The walls may have fallen, but the empire eternal endures in ways its last defenders could never have imagined. Constantinople's gift to the world was not territory or power, but the preservation and transmission of civilization itself. Thank you for journeying through 11 centuries of Byzantine history. If these stories of emperors and empires have illuminated the past for you, please subscribe to join future explorations of history's greatest civilizations.